Hi everyone, I'm Vicky. I'm content designer with Atlassian. As you know, Atlassian is a global company with a lot of successful products in the market. And I am working with the Agile and DevOps team here in Atlassian. And now I started closely working with internationalization team as well. So this topic is going to be really close to my heart. And to to become successful in this role, I have done some research, and I'm going to share top insights from my research to uh, help you understand what are the best practices for internationalization to influence your customer outreach. So before we dwell deep into the topic, I would like to let you know that these are the key takeaways from this talk. You will get to know the purpose of internationalization, content strategy for localization, some use cases and examples, some best practices, and a case study in general. Let's go. So, what makes a language influential or a global? So, in Language Monthly magazine, there was a study which was conducted about the factors that make a language influential. So, there are many factors. For example, number of primary speakers of the language, secondary speakers of the language, then population of countries using that particular language, and how that language is being consumed in the major fields. For example, science and technology, uh, then politics, sports, and financial domains. So George Weber, when he conducted this study, he found that there are 10 most influential language, and English came out to be on the top slot with the 37 points on the rank. So English has become the global language. So if English is the global language of business, then why do we need to localize the products, or why do we need to translate the content for the users? So here we need to keep in mind that English is not a preferred language in many countries. For example, in Europe, there is German, Spanish, French. And when we use content localization, it also gives us an opportunity to reach out to a lot of people, a lot of users, and generate a lot of revenue. So that's why we need to localize. For example, in Southeast Asia, people still opt for their native language if we give them a choice. So CSA is an organization which conducts market research, and they have a really beautiful caption that if the user can't read it, they won't buy it. And it is so true that if we don't know the product, we don't understand what is it about, then we are not going to buy the product. So localization is the key here. Now, in China also, the marketing and sales communication happen through the local language. And that's why maybe it is a time of the, it is a need of the hour that we need to localize our products and content. Sometimes people say, okay, they can get rid of this work by doing Google Translation. But Google Translation is just a workaround for content localization. It is not a solution because it impacts the quality of translation. It also doesn't provide you the context that you require to understand a particular piece of information. So what is globalization? And what is internationalization and localization? Are these all same? No. So internationalization is about designing or coding a product which is localization ready. So here we are talking at the granular level, the code level, the changes that we need to make at the product level in order to make it enabled for the localization. And localization is actually converting that product or content to the localized version. So localization is about more about translation, is more about quality assurance. It is more about adapting that product to the local. So the localization and internationalization combined form the globalization. So is content localization easy? Yeah, you may think, okay, it might be easy. No, it might be hard. So, but it requires budget. It takes time for products to go live, for the release to market. It needs supporting resources, for example, tools, processes, people. It has legal implications like policies, international standards, accessibility regulations. Oh, so so localization is hard. That's what you think. Now, I would say a localization strategy cannot guarantee success, but without localization, it will guarantee failure. Why is it so? Let's see an example. So, how localization generates revenue and increases market share? Let's take a very basic and familiar example. We all play video games on the mobile, on the laptops, on the desktops, and we know that they are quite interesting things to play. Now, if you see that the market share of localized and non-localized games is just 24%, while the revenue that we generate from this market share is 75%. It's a huge profit. When the study was conducted about mobile games market by language, it also quite visible that the revenue generated by the localized games is much higher because of the worldwide consumption. And this was the study done by Globalization and Localization Association. So, okay, so now you know localization is hard, but as it generates profit. Now, how can we make it happen? How can we reduce cost, speed up the translation cycle, and make it our second nature in the organization? Yes, it is possible. We have to make it the part of the content strategy and not an afterthought. How? Now let's see how can we develop a content strategy which is which is a sustainable framework for content localization. So here you have to do a lot of groundwork in order to sustain long term in the market. For example, you have to understand your target market, the culture and the heritage, your users, and the technology overall in the world. Because without this research, you cannot sustain long enough in the market in comparison to your competitors. So in the market research, we are going to analyze the market potential, the legal obligation, branding, and competitions. Then in culture and heritage research, we are going to analyze how many people speak English in that particular region. What is the language preference? Do they have a local language? Who is the target audience? I mean to say the age difference or the age range. Then what kind of language they use, formal, informal. You have to also consider the LGBTQ or the disability aspect, all the minority aspect which come under the inclusion. Then when you do the technology research, you have to understand what are the current trends, what are the market sentiments, what is the population, what are the things offered in the market, and what are the things that are impacting the products and services in that market. Whether there are certain devices which are frequently used, there are certain formats which are relatively more consumed. Are there any other platforms apart from digital platform which are being used? Then you have to also do the user research, and that research has to be informative, educational, interactive, conversational, transactional, and also testing it with the real beta users. So this whole analysis or the research will give you a conclusive result which you can use in your content strategy for localization. Let's take now general use cases of localization. You must have seen this small device. I'm giving you an analogy. This universal travel adapter. Why do we need it? Because there are different voltages, frequencies, and plugs in the world. So similarly, there are different systems of measurement like metric and imperial. There are different symbols and pictograms. The currency symbols are different. Date and time formats are different. Naming conventions are different. So there are so many differences, and to combat or handle these differences, you need to be ready, and you need to follow the localization or internationalization policies. Let's see who and how they are doing the localization and internationalization. So here are some examples of struggles when some products were launched in the global market. For example, when McDonald's they launched their food chain in China, their caption or the tagline is "I am loving it," but it got translated into Chinese, and which actually meant "I just like it," and which has a little negative connotation. On the other hand, when L'Oreal launched their cosmetic brand in China, and the tagline of L'Oreal is "Because you're worth it," got translated into Chinese, which actually meant you deserve to have it. It got really appraised by the people. So, so translation really makes a huge impact on the community. Similarly, when Parker pens they were launched in Spain, the tagline "It won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you" got translated as "It won't leak in your pocket and make you pregnant." Here, the embarazara word got translated wrongly in during translation. Similarly, when Apple launched Apple Siri, the personal voice assistant in Indonesia, the Siri, the meaning of the term Siri means de facto marriage, and which really became the fun talk of the town. Then the Netflix, the very popular mobile uh, application, it had a UI string "Don't miss out." But when it got translated into German, it actually consumed a lot of space, and the users ended up seeing broken UI element. So why I'm showing you these examples of struggles, I will discuss those things in the subsequent slides. Let's take an example, the best example of localization, Google. So Google is really a brand in terms of internationalization because it proves true to the tagline "Global Reach, Local Touch." It has designed the search engine optimization in such a way that users will see the search results that are relevant to that particular country where you are currently in. For example, if you are in Australia, you will see the results which are from Australia. So Google has, designed the metadata in such a way that the products are really localized specific. They do not show you worldwide information in your Google search. So after looking at these examples of struggles and the best examples, you would understand there are some best practices that you need to keep in mind while doing content localization or internationalization of your product. And what are those best practices for effective copies as far as content is concerned? So you have to follow a certain content approach. Your content has to be appropriate so that it applies to the local culture. It has to be meaningful, so it means the same in all your regions where you are shipping the product or content. It has to be user centric so that all users can understand in that particular region. It has to be error free and contextual, so the translation quality has to be very high. It has to be consistent. Now every organization follows a style and branding language, so you have to use that language, keeping your costs down. So you have to be consistent across the your product market. Then sometimes less is more. It means you have to be concise, you have to use minimalistic words so that it will cost you less during translation. Then you have to find whether you have right resources for your rescue. So that's why your copies have to be supportive in that particular situation. So what are do's and don'ts? These are really important. When you create copies which are localization ready, they have to be minimalistic and simplified. Don't use jargon, slangs, or homonyms, humors, and metaphors in your language, in your documentation, in your copies. Use universal conventions. Then also get rid of these abbreviations, which are not common universally. Then avoid graphics with text. It is really difficult to, translate text which is available on the graphics. Then this is really must that you must collaborate with the internationalization teams in order to get the input or feedback from them. Then don't use double negation your sentences. Provide a lot of context to your localization team before sending your content or doc drops for translation. Avoid ambiguity and long descriptions in the UI copies. Define a translation toolkit. You have to come up with a glossary for your product terminologies and UI terms, and keep maintain that so that you can keep it handy and provide it to the localization team, and they can use it at any point in time. Don't rely 100% on the tools which are available in the market for translation. Then you also need to test your copies which are translated with the real users to get sense out of it. Also, don't neglect, as I shown you the Google example, also don't neglect the search engine optimization. It is really essential. Then you need to analyze demography, the population, people's sentiment, their satisfaction levels, trends in the market, habits of the consumer, and also don't overlook maximum character limit in the UI strings. And if you follow these few tips, I think localization is not that hard. So let's look at a general case study. So while working with internationalization team in Atlassian, I came across a process, and your organization needs might be different. So on a general level, you can follow these three types of ways to achieve content localization. So transcreation, it is human translation. There are linguistics who are actually working on the copies and translating them into a different language. For example, marketing messages, UI copies, which are quite meaningful, and they require a lot of love from the translators. Then you can also use tool supported translation. So there are quite a tool which are available in the market, which help in computer aided translation. Then there are other softwares that you can use for automation. You can use this for structured content, for example, for concept, task, and reference kind of topics, for ease of translation. In machine translation, nowadays, you can use artificial intelligence, the memory, the translation memory, to translate large volumes of straightforward content from one language to another language. Then there is real-time communication, community forums, chatbots, and you can use machine translation in this particular case. So what all can you localize? See, it's up to you. It depends on your business situation or business requirements. But in general, you can translate user documentation, podcast, chatbots, tutorials, microcopies, which include banner headlines, call to action, product description and titles, and mobile UI text. So depends on your business requirement. You can, in fact, translate anything which is useful for you to generate revenue and acquire customers. In Atlassian, we translate user documentation in Japanese, and we also have, support for 23 languages in the world for our product internationalization. So what I would say, that don't worry, it's nothing crazy. As soon as you complete your research to define a sustainable framework for content strategy, you are good. You're good to go. Keep your product glossary updated. Track the content metrics regularly. There are a lot of statistical tools available. You can customize them. Have a feedback loop with internationalization team. It is very essential, because they give you a lot of customer satisfaction indexes that you can use in your content localization. Reverse engineering, so adapt and evolve. So content localization or product internationalization is a continuous process. So you have to adapt to the customer feedback, and evolve from it, and uh, then also analyze the demography time to time. So on a final note, what I would say, as Gabor Ugre says, a naive approach to localization can instantly write off all your gains in user experience. So do research, do study, and all the best for your content localization. Thank you.
Well, we've had some really, really good questions come through from folks as well. So I just want to see if we can jump straight in. The first set of questions are about quality and best practices. And one of the questions is, what's your best practice for creating content strategies for content that is going to be globalized?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is my first Write the Docs, and it's given me honor to be here and talking to you folks. Yeah. So the content strategy that I adopted is minimalism. For the UI copies, I use really simple language and less words to convey the message across. And I'm also in constant touch with the internationalization team here in Atlassian. We get a lot of feedback from there. Then there are some, if there is any confusion about product terminology to be translated, then we have a glossary which we maintain to what to translate, what not to translate, and if there are any bugs in translation, then we work together on that. Yeah.
So it sounds like that having a common set of words and having a glossary established actually helps when you're actually doing the globalization of content. I'd imagine that having that resource makes it easier to just hand that information over to the translators and have a common set of language that they need to translate against. Is that right?
Right. Correct.
No, that's a really good tip. Thanks for that one. That's great. So how would you translate a language into one that perhaps you're not that familiar with? The question here relates to a product that, it's sold in countries where, they don't have a lot of employees, but only customers. When you're looking at implementing an internationalization strategy in those situations, what's the best approach to use when you're faced with that challenge?
So here you have to follow the offshore development model. You may not have the right resources onshore. So in that case, you can take help of the vendors and the translators or the linguistics, the people who can speak different languages. So you can hire them or have them on contract, and you can then, you may not have the full control over the localization, but it is the best approach to, have people who are expert in that field or they know the language, and then also have the vendors available, so who can help you in machine translation. That is the approach to begin with, because over the period of time you can adopt and evolve.
No, that's really good advice. So go with the translators for that language experts, and then work with them wherever they are in the world. And I'd imagine that in the world that we live in now, that's far less difficult than it was before, right?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. And leading on from that question as well is another one about localization quality. So have you got any tips for the folks about controlling the quality of your localizations when translation's being done by one of those offshore external third parties?
Yeah, you can have the blitz session. I mean, the testing session for let's say with the limited audience. Maybe those are internal stakeholders or the people in the market and who are your premium customers. So you can work with them closely and have your copies shared with them and get their first-hand feedback, what they feel about the copies, because it is really essential, and it is important thing to understand whether that copy got translated correctly, and whether it is making the sense, whether it is conveying the right meaning to the user.
Very good point.
So beta testing is the key. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So one for perhaps the folks that identify as developers, for user interface strings or UI strings, do developers need to add anything extra in the code to help out with translation?
Yes, they have to, for example, suppose there is a date time format, then they have to tweak that date time format. Don't hard code anything that cannot be changed later on. So that's a really simple example, but there are a lot of things that a developer has to do, and that is altogether a complete session on for developers. So I think yes, on the code level you have to do a lot of tweaks, and you have to follow the universal convention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, a question which is probably in sort of getting into the depths of translation, but it seems like an interesting one given the world we're living in now. What are some tips about implementing gender neutrality in translated content? I'd imagine that there are some variances between languages that might make that a bit tricky. What's your experience been when dealing with that particular challenge?
Yeah, so you can, when you refer users in your documentation, you have to take care of gender neutral language, and also take care of the colors, because some colors are really offensive to some users. Then some kind of jokes, they're quite offensive at some points. So you have to take care of, if you are using casual language in your copies, or if you have a product tour in your UI, take care of those homonyms and metaphors and humor when you make those things in your copies. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely can be risky. It's not. It's certainly not even limited to translation as well. But if your documentation is a target for translation, I'd imagine that there needs to be some pretty clear um, decisions made. I would. Do you think that would actually flow back into that translation style guide and the sort of guidelines you have when you're actually doing your work like that?
Yes. So in Atlassian, we recently developed a inclusion style guide, or inclusion guidelines for the look for the content designing. So I think it's a matter of experience with your customers, and the general trend in the market. So you can create your own style guide, or follow the one which is available for having the inclusion guidelines for localization.
Mm, it sounds like a really important part.
Yeah.
So, when we're looking at when we have our work translated and we actually get to the point where the content is translated, is there a way that you can easily spot words that might have actually been mistranslated when the people reviewing it, i.e., you and I, maybe aren't translators as our core job? Is there any advice you can offer there for ways of working around how to make sure that the translated content coming back in is just as good as the one that you put in?
Yes. So when you are working on a copy, uh, always take a step back and review it for yourself after some time, because when you are writing a copy, you are really emotional, or you are connected with that copy, and you may not figure out what are the mistakes in the copy. But then take a step back, take some time, and then self review that copy again, then refer to your style guide and design guidelines, and see if you are using any local terms in your copy which is not familiar to the worldwide audience. So then you can definitely spot some errors quickly before sending those doc drops to localization.
No, that's some really good tips there. That's great. Let me just do a little quick time check here to see where we are placed for the next session. I know that this session finished a little earlier, so we do have a little bit of extra time up our sleeve. We might be able to get in a few extra questions, actually. Um, uh, what about the whole idea around translating glossaries? It seems like glossaries form a pretty important part of documentation when you're trying to I guess, convey standard terms that might not be familiar to users. Are there any specific tips you have about localizing or translating glossaries in documentation?
Yeah, so what helped me, because I'm also starting with this localization team, and it is I'm also exploring and doing my own research. So what I realized, if you're dealing with really technical term, then take a pen and paper, draw what you understand, create a small workflow or a picture, and you can share that with the localization team, so that they can understand what you're trying to say about that particular term, and
Mm.
then they can translate. So having some kind of pictograms or workflows ready for the hardcore technical terms is really helpful.
That's a really good advice. That's excellent.
Yeah.
So, when we're talking about accessibility in documentation, are there any particular concerns we need to consider when we're catering for folks who have accessibility front of mind?
So I haven't came across that scenario, but from my understanding, what I can say, the general accessibility guidelines are enough. You can use those guidelines, apply on your copies, because at some point in time, you cannot translate the the key terms from your product. You have to keep them as is, and then you can go ahead with your accessibility rules and regulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we might have to. I think we have actually run out of time for Q&As now. Like, I just want to say thank you again, Wiki, for coming in and having a great Q&A session with us today.
Thank you, Garrett. Yeah, it was wonderful talking to you and answering all the questions. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.